Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 346 XP. The customer complaint is that it won't idle right. So you can see here that the idle is high and the chain won't stop turning. Most of you know what the problem is already. But actually I can see that we probably have two problems going on. This customer brought in 5 or 6 chainsaws. He runs a tree service. And of all the ones he brought in, this is the one that I thought I could get going today and get him back on the road. So if it does have an air leak, I should have the parts to fix it. And if there's a reason why that chain won't stop turning, I should have the parts to fix that as well, whether it be new or used parts. So what happens here is, well, let me back up a minute. First we're going to pop this clutch off of there. And you can see this clutch has got some wear in it. So I'll be harvesting some parts out of a used saw. Take a look at my left hand. I'm making sure that the kill switch is off before I spin that clutch off of there. Because I'm just saying, if it's not turned off and you crank on that thing with an impact, there's a fair chance that the engine could start. Yeah. So that's the oil pump there. A lot of gunk underneath here, but you know, we just came out of a big storm. And this thing, I'm sure, gets used every day, all day long. So I got it cleaned up. I got the plate put back on. We're putting it back together. Now what happens here is this plastic worm, it drives the oil pump. Well, it's driven by the clutch drum. Now the clutch drum doesn't turn unless the clutch is engaged. But what happens if that worm is binding on the shaft? Like here, we can see it's dragging. Now here's a second gear that I've got that I'm greasing up, and we'll put it on there, and you'll see that it goes on pretty easy and it's not dragging. It spins real nice. So the first gear was dragging on the crankshaft, back feeding to the drum and turning the chain. If you guessed that it was a clutch spring that was causing the chain to keep going, you would have been wrong in this case. We're going to put a little grease on the clutch bearing, put this thing back together, and get back to diagnosing our air leak. So that clutch drum interlocks into the worm gear. And this clutch, you can see it's got some wear on it, so we're gonna put a different used clutch in there that isn't as worn out. Give it a couple ugga-duggas, call it good. And then we'll bar it up, fire it up, and see if we accomplished anything. So you can see our chain isn't dragging anymore. Saw's still not running right, but the chain isn't dragging anymore. I got this idea in my head that if I pay enough attention, and I do enough of these, I might be able to figure out where an air leak is just by listening to it, filling with it, whatever. You know, whether it be a crank seal or an intake boot or a base gasket. You know, it's probably just a pipe dream, but been thinking maybe I can figure it out. So now, because I want to get this thing out the door, I'm thinking what's going to be the quickest way to do this without pressure testing it. Well, first I want to experiment a little bit with my idea that I can diagnose these things without having to touch them. Much like, you know, the sound you get from a plugged spark arrestor. You know, you can tell what's wrong with it without having to get into it physically. And this is a big enough air leak that I got a pretty good idea what's going on. But dang, I just don't want to waste the time pressure testing this thing. So screw it. We are going to use the old school can of carb clean method. And you can see we obviously got a leak somewhere around the intake boot, maybe the base gasket. So the boot looks physically fine, and I'm seeing 4 bolts in the cylinder base. Easiest thing to do is check that bolt tightness, and you can see that there's no tightness at all on that bolt. So that was easy enough to find our leak. Now, is the right thing to do to pull it apart and put a new gasket in there? Yeah, maybe. But we're gonna crank it down, see if it fixes the leak, and send it. This guy needs to get his saw back. He's smart enough to know when there's an air leak and to stop using the saw. So we're gonna try and get him out the door. You see me just yank on that choke handle and push it right back in. If you're not familiar with a Husky saw, that choke also sets a fast idle, and it's just easier to start the saw when you have it the fast idle set. So I'm going to mess around here a little bit with the carburetor adjustments and get this thing close enough to tune that I can take it out to a log and fine tune it. Did our carb clean test. Didn't have any problems. I'd say we got our leak fixed. Chain's not dragging anymore. So we're just going to go back and put an extra ugga-dugga on each of these bolts. I think the spec might be 11 to 14 Newton meters. I don't remember right now. If I'm putting a new piston and cylinder on something, I usually look up the torque spec. If I'm winging it like I am right now, we use the ugga-dugga method. I don't know why this damn bit got stuck in here, but we get her popped out. We got our good ugga-dugga on each one of them. We're just going to double check the first one we started with and see if it's still tight. Good to go. Air filter's got a little bit of crap in it. We'll get that cleaned up. I mean, this guy does his own maintenance anyway, but we'll set him up so he can just grab the saw and start cutting. This thing could use a bath, hey? But anyway, that's all I got for you on the Husqvarna 346 XP cylinder base gasket air leak. Thanks for watching. Later.